Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is brought to you by the Which Side Media Collective. Right now until the end of the month, all gift cards are 25% off on the Which Side Media Collective store.
So, I mean, if you do the math on that, you get a $10 gift card for $7.50.
That's a good deal.
It is, yeah.
Get them now in time for the holidays.
Holidays. Fuck that.
WhичSideCollective.org. Gift card 25.
Oh, yeah, that's the code. You need that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Use promo code gift card 25.
Gift card 25. For the holidays.
Which one?
All of them.
All the holidays.
All the holidays.
Get it in time for things.
No, we're just being way ahead of May Day.
Yeah, no, that's honestly what it is. You know,
just make sure you get your orders in time for May Day.
Get your May Day orders in.
WhичSideCollective.org. Promo code
gift card 25.
This is episode 213.
Yeah, we talked to Amanda in this episode about Cleveland 4 and some other things.
Some really great conversations, some really good things of how we can build movements together, security culture, and the great work that she's doing. So, Jordan, what news and events we have going on?
On January 20th of this year, there is a national general strike. So, find out if there's one in your area, or if you'll be going down to DC to partake in the national one. And this week we're asking that all of our listeners write Cleveland 4. You can find out how to contact them at cleveland4solidarity.org.
This week's listener shout out is brought to you by Sam Matson. Sam said, "I'd like to shout out to Lindsay Mills, president of the Veg TTU Club at Tennessee Tech University, for getting in the shit and doing work for the animals, for bringing positive change to our little town in rural Tennessee. Fuck shit damn."
Thanks, Sam.
And thank you, Lindsay. Like, seriously, this whole episode is about grassroots organizing, and that's exactly what you all are doing. So keep that up. And let us know what you're doing. We'll give you all a shout out with anything you have going on in your neck of the woods.
Maliki Shakur Latin just walked out of prison on parole on December 6th of this year. After 37 years behind the walls, he's finally reunited with his friends, family, and community. His transition into minimum security America is just beginning, and support does not end with release from prison. So please donate to his release fund to help him cover the cost of basic survival needs and small comforts as he gets his footing. Just go to rally.org/Maliki.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed this episode.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
I don't know if you know, we actually just did a lecture that you participated in recently as well.
Yeah, I did see that go up. I didn't watch it because I remember doing the lecture, but yeah. Thank you for posting that.
No, thank you for doing it. Like, honestly, yeah. So, how's your Sunday going so far?
It's going good. Mostly been hanging out with my dog so far today. So, not bad.
So, when you hang out with your dog, does that just, is that around the house? Do you go to the dog park, go for a run? Like, what does that consist of for you?
She is not good enough with other dogs to take her to a dog park. So we do like neighborhood walks and trails when we can. And then she loves to hang out on the couch and cuddle.
It just sounds just like my new little guy. We're trying to get him to socialize with other dogs right now. But so far, not the greatest.
Yeah, unfortunately, my dog had a rough start to life for her first few years. She was pretty abused, and I think she was mostly just kept in a cage, and she didn't really learn how to interact with other dogs, and she still doesn't understand playing with toys and things like that. So, yeah, if you can get your dog introduced to other dogs, that's awesome, because it's harder and harder as they get older.
Yeah, so I don't even, the trick that we're facing is I don't even know how old he is.
Okay.
So the best that we can tell is that pretty much all of his life till now, he's just been from shelter to shelter to shelter.
Oh, no.
So, but he's, we're guessing youngish, 1.5, one-ish.
Okay.
So still pretty young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's lucky to be out of a shelter now.
I hope so.
Yes.
Yes. Anyways, so
I'll talk about my dog for the whole time if you want. I do that a lot.
I'm actually totally game with this.
Yeah, I'll send pictures too that you guys can post.
Because honestly, it's relatively new for myself. I'm usually not much of a companion animal person. Not that I hate them, but just I'm okay. They can do their thing. I can do my thing. Yeah. But it's been an interesting, good experience. I hope for everyone involved.
Yeah, I grew up with cats and was kind of like that, where it's like they wanted to do their thing, but now having a dog, she's so much more interactive, and it's such a different bond to have with her, and I love it now.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that they're like my little guy. He's just like, look, I need attention all the time, like all the time, and I'm used to again, used to cats, where it's just like, hey, I will come to you when I want you. Otherwise, leave me the fuck alone. And I was cool with that relationship, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I currently have cats.
Yep. Yeah, my dog is staring at me right now as I do this, because she either wants to be interacting with me or she wants to just watch me.
Yeah, my guy was just growling at Jordan because he's like, dude, you're not giving me enough attention right now, and I'm here. So
sounds good.
At my feet.
Aww. Dogs are great.
So what have you been up to since last time we chatted?
Oh goodness. I don't remember what month it was that I talked to, but that last interview was about the No New Animal Lab campaign. And I guess the big thing that's happened with that since then is we did a European speaking tour, because it has been an international campaign, because one of the main targets was Skanska, which is a construction company building an underground lab at the University of Washington. And they have offices in Europe, as well as other parts of the world and in the U.S. So there have been people involved in that campaign for the last couple of years around the world. And so we finally managed to arrange a European speaking tour to be able to meet with activists over there and talk with them about the campaign, as well as a lot of movement building in general, because they face a lot of the same struggles we do here in the U.S., where a lot of desire to still have a radical grassroots animal liberation community and to work on, pressure campaigns and things like that. But dealing with the rise of kind of the corporate style nonprofits that focus on veganism and campaigns that big donors like. So it was a great experience to get to talk with people over there and see how they're continuing to hold on to grassroots movements, and to see how we can work together to have international networking as we all move forward. And it was great to see how people do things there, to speak in squats that have been well established, to hear about how they do prisoner support there, to see how they do anti-fascist organizing. Just a really amazing time to be able to interact with people in that way, and amazing to see them paying attention to what we're doing here in the U.S. in the animal liberation movement.
So one of the things that I wanted to dive into a little bit more that you just mentioned was how they're holding on to grassroots organizing, and I think that's really fallen short here for a very, very long time, up until I would say the No New Animal Labs that was being preached for. So how what were the lessons kind of learned from that?
The biggest thing, the place that made the biggest impression on me were some of the communities in Spain, where they have long history of like anarchist organizing there. And that's very much a part of how they do their organizing. And they have amazing squats there that, they've had for things like a decade. And they're really vibrant community spaces where they do things like hosting talks, like for us when we were there, hosting potlucks where anyone from the community who either wants to, share in discussion or who just needs a meal can come there and be a part of that. They host things like self-defense classes, art chances to do artwork there, and just make it a place where people can come together and get to know each other and build real bonds, so that then when you're talking about going out in the streets or developing campaigns or putting yourselves in more high-risk situations, you have a real community there to support that and to be willing to push the boundaries more and to develop more full campaigns and things like that. And I was just blown away going in there as someone who, coming from the other side of the world, and yet within an hour feeling like I was welcome and part of the community there, and just so much warmth. And that's something that I hope that we can continue to build more of in the U.S., where it seems like we've lost a lot of that kind of community in the grassroots movement. Mm-hmm. And that, we need to continue to rebuild, because it's going to be having that community foundation that's going to allow us to do the organizing work we need to, so that we can effectively challenge how animals are exploited, as well as a lot of other fucked up things that are happening.
What do you think are some of the contributors that created the loss of that community here in the U.S.?
Oh, a mixture of things. We've seen that kind of the impact that government repression has had. The Green Scare, unfortunately, did scare a lot of people. And when those things happen, rather than there being, a good critical analysis in the movement, talking about the government does things like that, not so much to put a bunch of people in jail, but to scare us. They make examples of some people, make people afraid, throw in the word terrorism and make people not want to be identified with that. And people step back from a lot of the kind of high pressure corporate campaigns, like things like the Shat campaign. And a lot of people gravitated more to the big nonprofit organizations, and kind of left a lot of the grassroots stuff. And these big nonprofits, function to brand themselves, to continue to make more money, to pay people high salaries and things like that. And when people organize a demonstration with those organizations, it's just continuing to brand them rather than to build community groups. I don't know how many times I've seen people do things like want to organize a local demonstration, but then they're holding signs that say PETA. PETA sends people there to do interviews with the PETA branding and things like that. And the community group gets no real support. Nobody even knows that they exist as a local community group. Mm-hmm. And so it's just unfortunate to see how widespread that became nationally. We've done, through the No Animal Lab campaign, we did a lot of traveling throughout the U.S. And kind of everywhere we went, we're seeing these community groups that are trying, but not getting a lot of traction when they're trying to do organizing, because everything's been so overshadowed by the missions of the larger nonprofits.
How, as a community, can we help combat that?
I think a big part of it is kind of looking back to our own history. This is something we've talked a lot about in talks we've done associated with the campaign. And, the animal liberation movement has a grassroots history that was very much grounded in things at the local level. And looking back to that, and also looking back at a lot of the solidarity work that was done, it wasn't always such an isolated movement. And kind of having the courage, I guess, to reject a lot of what the big nonprofits are doing, and think about what will make effective campaigns or whatever else we want to do in our communities. With the No Animal Lab campaign, I think people saw that as, kind of inspirational and powerful, because it was different in how we were doing that. We definitely grounded it in more radical politics. We made it not just about, what vegan food can you buy, but what is going to tangibly help animals, even if that meant using controversial tactics. We've done a lot of support work for other communities. I just got back from doing legal support out at Standing Rock. We've supported things like the Utah tar sands resistance. We've supported the Black Lives Matter movement in the cities we live in and things like that, that it's just, reaching out and showing that we really do care about a broad spectrum of kind of radical politics and pushing back against all the different ways that the government and corporations are hurting humans and animals, and recognizing that we need to have these like bigger networks both within our movement and between other movements if we're going to actually build momentum that's effective enough to challenge, giant corporations and the government and things like that.
I love that you brought up like the root of utilizing and embracing radical politics in the movement. Going up through the early 90s and into the early 2000s, it was all based on radical politics. And then there was like this shift of almost just like, we want to distance ourselves as far away from that base as we can. And I don't know if that shift was in correlation with the same shift towards lifestyle veganism, right? But it almost feels that way, right? Like it was just, let's make it about, what you buy at the grocery store and which is important, but it's not the end all of the movement, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it amazes me when people talk about veganism as just the food they eat. Like, I'm vegan, and for me, I became vegan because of what's happening to animals and wanting to do something in my personal life to not, feel like I'm participating in that, and for that to be a reflection of other work I'm doing. I can't imagine like completely divorcing that from feeling compelled to go out and do things to actively help animals.
So how can someone like myself, who was extremely active in grassroots organizing and then became jaded mainly due to local internal politics as well as national organizations switching to lifestyle politics, how can someone like me reinvigorate themselves and get back involved and get into the streets, like, basically? Because for me, I still find it hard to, with a lot of campaigns, be like, I'm going to take my time out and actually do this because it will make a difference. Most campaigns, I kind of feel like, like it's really not going to make that big of a difference towards the greater goal of the movement.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes place that I personally really like seeing people who've been kind of involved previously is just come back into some of that community spaces and talk about what things used to be like. Because now it amazes me when we see people who are newer getting involved and they've never even heard of like the Shat campaign. They don't know what you're talking about when you bring it up. And I think that then when, people are talking about, well, what do we want to do now? And all they've seen is things like reactionary circus protest or posting pictures of food you eat on the internet. And those are the only examples they have unless they've, take more of an active effort to look back at stuff. So just being in places and having those conversations with people to like push their imagination in different places and to make it even possible to imagine doing something like what used to be done, I think is super important. I love when people like have come out to like our demonstrations or other events that we have, and they'll mention these things. And then, these people, I've had a lot of experiences of telling newer people like, no, like, say the No Animal Life campaign, it, is very influenced by this campaign called Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty. And they're like, well, what's that? And then you start to explain it to them. And then they just think that, we're these few people who remember this thing from a long time ago. But when there's other people who can like talk about it, it seems like, oh yeah, that really was a thing. Like I remember showing some new people who are getting involved Time for Action videos from back then. And they were like, they couldn't believe it. They were like, oh wow. So yeah, I think that just having those conversations and pushing people to imagine stuff like that again is a big thing, because the movement has lost a lot of belief in what we can do. It's amazing to see people think that we aren't really going to be able to change anything, so they don't feel like it's worth trying. But we can. We've seen it happen. We continue to still see it happen in different forms. And if we believe that we can actually, impact corporate decisions or things like that, then we're going to try a lot harder, and we're going to be willing to try more tactics if we actually believe it could work than if we've already like given up from the beginning and think that all we can do is like buy 5 new kinds of vegan ice cream or whatever it might be.
I've seen a couple data points that shows that the amount of underground actions that take place directly correlate with the amount of grassroots above ground activism taking place, right?
Yeah.
More of, I'm not saying one causes the other one, but the more of one includes the more of the other one, right?
Yeah.
And I think that leads directly into the current cases that we're seeing with the government crackdown, right? I think that's like a perfect segue into like the Cleveland 4 that you're working in. And how can we as a community embrace that change, right? Like, I don't know if we've as a community completely embraced how government repression has changed over the years. You know, like we got so used to the standard cointelpro that now, you know, I don't know if I'm even forming a question clearly. Just
keep going.
Yeah. Just how can we go from like what we were taught like in the 90s of how repression worked to how repression is working now today?
Well, I think the big thing is to acknowledge that, you know, we're living in the post 9/11 era with everything. And with that did bring this heightened government interest in getting terrorism prosecutions, as well as a heightened public fear of anything that the government labels terrorism. And it's, you know, now been out there as this word that has kind of unclear definitions in a lot of ways. And so we've seen it applied to animal rights activists, environmental activists, the Cleveland 4, and it's a different climate to be organizing in a lot of ways, probably. But it's in a lot of ways, though, a continuation of cointelpro and things that we've seen for decades, because anytime you have a social movement that is, you know, starting to effectively challenge those in power and make them uncomfortable, you're going to see them push back. And so we need to continue to criticize and analyze what the government is doing when they're doing that. Because if we just have more knowledge about what's happening and what their motivations are, we can better combat it.
You know, I was in a conversation the other day and with some individuals, and they never even heard the term cointelpro before. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with it, would you mind kind of going into a little bit of the history?
Yeah, so cointelpro was revealed, I believe, in the early 70s as this massive counterintelligence program that the FBI was conducting, where we started seeing a lot of surveillance of citizens who were involved in any sort of dissent movement, whether it's like the women's liberation movement or a lot of like the student organizing going on at the time. And the most infamous is the like sort of infiltration and surveillance of the Black Panthers, and the government engaging in tactics that were surveillance, but also very much intervening, doing things like having people infiltrate movements, or doing things like inserting false information in movements to stir up people not trusting each other, or just a variety of different tactics to do what they could to disrupt. And unfortunately, a lot of that was effective in different forms. And we can, even though eventually people broke into an FBI office, got papers that like started to reveal this level of surveillance and infiltration that was going on, and it became very publicized. There were court hearings about it and everything. And, you know, the government kind of said that, well, officially this is ending, this isn't okay. But that was, you know, was told to the public. Behind the scenes, there is still very much all of that continuing to go on. And we can see it in a variety of different social movements. And now kind of saying in the post 9/11 era, we're seeing it take this different form. And we've seen a pattern of that. Like the Cleveland 4 would be one example of, and not the only one, where there's this pattern of the government sending an infiltrator into some sort of community that, you know, they have suspicion of, whether it's because it's a Muslim community or an anarchist community. We can see those different forms happen, and sending an infiltrator, coercing young men who are at vulnerable points in their life for different reasons. The FBI kind of constructing a so-called terrorism plot, manipulating people into going along with it, and then busting it saying, oh, we caught the terrorist, even though there never would have been any sort of terrorism thing to begin with. But in the end, it lets the FBI do a press release saying, we caught the terrorists and now everyone's safe, as they get to villainize whatever community it was that they were doing this to.
So that kind of brings us to Cleveland 4 in general. Do you kind of want to give, I guess, a recap of that whole situation, the whole case?
Yeah, I'll make this as brief as I can. The more I learn about it, the more of the facts surrounding it that it's just appalling. And like, I encourage anyone listening to like look up more. There were a lot of articles written about it at the time and in the years since. But yeah, so a brief summary. So during the Occupy movement, I think it's pretty common knowledge now that the government was doing a lot of surveillance, was treating it as a terrorism threat happening even before there were Occupy encampments even set up, and were surveilling it, infiltrating it. And then it was around the time that Occupy encampments started to fall apart that the Cleveland 4 situation happened. They sent an informant into one of the Occupy meetings in Cleveland, who kind of zeroed in on the, kids who looked like anarchists there, who seemed to be more radical than other people. He started talking with them, and then over a series of months, continued to meet with this small group of people who came to Cleveland 4. And to give a bit of background about the informant, he was someone whose kind of court papers refer to him as a master manipulator. He had a long criminal history of a lot of so-called crimes of fraud. He was in legal trouble of his own and wanted something to be able to give to the FBI to try and get out of his own charges. And then you had this group of young men who were, late teens to 20s at the time, in really difficult points in their lives, dealing with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, addiction. And then Occupy had fallen apart. They didn't have places to live. They were struggling in a lot of ways. And then this informant comes in who's offering them jobs, who is giving them drugs and alcohol, who's becoming sort of a father figure to them. And he slowly coerces them into this plot that's created by the FBI to blow up a bridge. And the FBI supplies fake explosives. He manipulates them into going to this bridge. And then they are all arrested as terrorists, and the FBI gets to do their press release.
So what was the aftermath of them being arrested and then going through trial and things like that?
Yeah, so initially there were 5 of them, but one of them ended up cooperating with the government, which is why it became the Cleveland 4, who received movement support. And of those 4, 3 of them they pled guilty, non-cooperating plea deals. And oftentimes when we think of people pleading guilty and having a plea deal, we think of everything being worked out ahead of time. They know what their sentence is going to be when they go and plead before the judge. But in this situation, they didn't know that. They pled guilty without knowing what they were going to be sentenced to. And then they went before the judge, and they got, each of them got about a decade, give or take a year or two. And then also the judge applied a terrorism enhancement, which made it so that he had the discretion to give them supervised release of anywhere from 0 years to life. And he gave them all lifetime supervised release, which is basically being on probation for the rest of their lives. And then the 4th person went to trial as representing himself. And that unfortunately was a mess. I mean, you can imagine someone who hasn't been to law school trying to represent himself in a pretty intense trial. And so he was found guilty by a jury and also got 10 years and lifetime supervised release. So that's pretty daunting for this group of young people who were pulled into this plot at, young, vulnerable times in their lives, and now looking at punishment for the rest of their lives. It's pretty extraordinary and absurd and ridiculous in like any way you look at it. And that terrorism enhancement has also contributed to them having rough times in prison. They've, spent a lot of time in high security prisons, a lot of time in solitary confinement. They deal with scrutiny from guards. And again, just seeing that use of that word terrorism come into play in a situation where it plays into the government's interest in this, but then for the people that term is being used against are people that it never should have applied to. They were, kids doing Occupy demonstrations who initially, when the informant approached them, telling them that he wanted to help them out, they thought that meant that he would buy stuff for them to use in protest, not, coerce them into trying to blow up a bridge.
Yeah. So, like you said earlier, this has been a pattern of this type of infiltration and behavior to get arrests. And it still blows my mind that juries fall for it every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in doing the legal work I have for them, I've been reading a lot about like the different statistics, and basically everything you read about it says that if the government is using the word terrorism in your case, you're going to be found guilty by a jury. Like, you basically don't have hope with that. And so, there's so much to support that what happened to the Cleveland Four was entrapment. Like, I mean, you can look at all the elements of entrapment and see how they're all met. And the whole situation is appalling to like everyone I talk to about it. But yet people are so afraid of that word terrorism and have such an emotional connection to it that it's hard to get juries and even judges to look at the facts of the situation and be able to recognize that these things would not have happened if not for the FBI constructing the whole thing. And so, like, what does that say about these so-called counterterrorism efforts when, they're saying that they're saving the public from things that were never threats to begin with?
It's like they have to manufacture the threats in order to maintain their current budgets.
Basically, yeah. Yep.
So has any of these cases been pushed all the way to the Supreme Court?
I'm not positive about that. But I do know that with the Cleveland Four, they did appeal it to the Court of Appeals, and that didn't go well for them. They lost that appeal. So, yeah, it's a difficult legal battle for people.
So what is the current work being done around the Cleveland Four right now?
So I've personally been doing work with Brandon Baxter, who's one of them, because he was interested in doing FOIA requests to the FBI and other government agencies to try and find out more information about all the circumstances surrounding what happened to them, because there do seem to be like pieces missing in the information he was given through discovery and things like that. And there's just so much to the whole context of what in the situation that this happened in, just looking at, what from kind of the biggest level of the post 9/11 terrorism prosecutions, then you look at the government interest in Occupy, and then you look at what happened to the Cleveland Four. So he wants to find out more about the context of what happened with them. And I also worked with him on a clemency petition that was submitted. But then more broadly, in regard to support for all of them, they need more support, just to be frank about it. they've all been in prison for 4+ years now. And like we see with a lot of political prisoner cases, at first, there were a lot of articles about it, a lot more people interested in what was happening, people, donating to support them, people tabling about them, and all those types of things. But it's been over 4 years now, and a lot of that has decreased. And these people still have years left in prison and then lifetime supervised release. And so they need the movement to take care of them more. If just in regard to like any prisoner support work, like if we're going to engage in movements that challenge the government, we are going to see pushback. And so when there are people who are the target of that and examples are made of them, we have to then do our job of making sure that they don't feel forgotten, that they have the support that they need, and that we use their cases not to end up being afraid to do stuff, but to use them as motivation to push back harder. The government continues to do things like this because when they do, it makes people scared and not want to be involved anymore. But if they see that instead, this just pushes us to challenge more of the problems with the government and things like that, and to not fall away from doing this type of work. It takes away a lot of the power that they have, and to just generally to take away some of the power of the word terrorism, to like say, like, look at who you're applying this word to. It makes no sense. And to just, keep questioning, keep criticizing, and then to show support for the people who end up being the targets of all this.
When you say that they all need more support right now, is that just in the form of writing letters, or is there other ways that people can show support besides the standard? Yeah,
so writing letters is big, of course. They all really appreciate hearing from people, hearing just what's going on. And on their website, it's cleveland4solidarity.org, or you can just Google Cleveland 4 and it'll be the first thing that shows up. You can see on there all of their addresses for writing letters to them. They're in prisons all over the country. You can also see their book wish list, which they appreciate getting books to read to help pass the time and to be able to continue to learn things. Donations are also big because they've had people doing, primarily one person doing support for them for a long time. And that person has made sure that each of them get $50 a month on their commissary every month, which that's $200 a month that someone has been taking on, raising largely on their own. And that's hard for someone to sustain. So donations are super important. And with any prisoners, like everything in prison costs money for people if they want to buy things from commissary so that they can have other food or personal hygiene products or things like that. That costs money. If they want to be able to call loved ones, it costs money to use the phone. If they want to be able to email people, it costs money every minute that they're on email. If they want to write letters to people, it costs money for the stamps and the paper. So just all of that adds up quickly. And so even $50 a month is not a lot for them to get each month. And so just donations are super important and will continue to be for as long as they're in prison. And then to be able to support them when they get out and are trying to move on to the next step of their life as they're dealing with being on probation as well. And I know a lot of people who listen to this show come from the vegan, animal rights, animal liberation community. And I've worked on prisoner support work for people like Kevin and Tyler, who were indicted under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. And I've seen like the amazing amount of support that they get, like consistent letters from all over the world, donations to their commissary so that they didn't have to worry about if they'd have enough money to call their families or things like that. And like that, in a lot of ways, we see this is a very privileged movement that a lot of people from other movements don't experience. And so I encourage people, like, if you're doing things to support animal liberation prisoners, look at lists of other political prisoners. There are people who've been in prison for decades. And then there are people like the Cleveland Four who desperately need support. Like, if you're going to write a letter to an animal rights prisoner, write a letter to someone else too. If you're going to donate to an animal rights prisoner, donate to someone else too, because we talk about, inter-movement solidarity and things like that. And prisoner support is a very tangible way to do that. That's super critical and super important and, needs to be part of our work too. And the use of all cages, whether it's for animals or humans.
And you talked about the use of how every time they need to do something in prison, it just costs them money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I want people to really understand is that it's not the pricing that you would normally associate with. Yeah. It is exorbitantly more expensive for them to do every little thing than it does on the outside.
Like a pack of ramen noodles might cost $1 as opposed to 20 cents at the store.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's part of, for anyone involved in any kind of social justice work, if you haven't already done learning about prisons, like, there's a lot to learn about it that shows, how messed up this system is. Like, whether it's private prisons or the government, there's a motivation to keep people in prison because they make money off of them. And that's why we see, continued criminalization of people and continued motivation to keep people in prison because they're making money off of keeping people confined.
So looking at the Cleveland Four case and cases like this, what are some lessons that we can use as a greater community moving forward?
Take care of each other is one of the biggest things that I always think of, to make sure that when the government is going after people, like going after our friends, our community members, to never let them feel alone in that, because just those shows of solidarity will be a huge message to the government that they can't divide us in the ways that they try to. That was a big part of like the Cleveland Four cases. Let's paint some members of Occupy as terrorists and extremists, and then no one else will want anything to do with them, and people won't want anything to do with the Occupy movement. And that's been something that we've seen throughout, the history of the government trying to break apart social justice movements, is that division. We talked earlier about within the animal rights movement, how we've saw that happen. In a lot of ways, that split between like the radical grassroots and the corporate nonprofits happened in a lot of ways as a response to what the government was doing and with encouragement from the government. And so the government loves it when there's that separation because it weakens us. So that's the big thing. Take care of each other, stick by each other, and to question what's being done to people and to not buy into the government's narrative and to keep creating our own, and to keep pushing, information, literature, whatever it might be, that creates our own narrative about all of this, and to keep organizing, to keep finding ways to be more effective, because when we've seen social movements do a lot of amazing things when we are able to work together and to strategize and to have strong politics as a foundation, and we need to keep doing that work.
How can we as a community get better at transferring this information of security culture? Because I remember going back into the 90s, it wouldn't go a month or two where there wasn't some training class or it wasn't talked about. And I'll talk to activists now who've never even heard the term. Like they don't, it just isn't even on their radar.
Yeah. Security culture is important. It definitely is. There need to be more trainings. As much as I can, I try to do like teaching so-called like know your rights trainings with a big security culture component in that. And it's something that we need to both like if you're able to like plan a training in your community, and Go to trainings if you see them. There are zines about security culture that are great. Find those, read them, print them out, give them to people. It's something like when I'm doing campaign work, if people are coming out to demonstrations, I try to have those conversations with them. Whenever I've like done tabling, we have some of that information like out on our table and stuff. And it's something that just needs to be part of the fabric of the work we do again, because the government is paying attention to our work, and we need to keep each other and keep the work we're doing as safe as we can. And it's just good practice for us all to be doing. So yeah, talking about it with people and making sure that people still understand what it is, and reminding them that it's not to try and like seem like cool or something. Like it really is about safety and looking out for each other. And talking to people about like those reasons why. And there are plenty of examples we can point to how security culture has either protected people or how lapses in it have led to unfortunate things for people.
And I think it's also important for people to realize that security culture isn't about just whether or not you think that you're going to be involved in illegal activities or around illegal activities. It's something that everyone should know. Yeah.
I mean, we've definitely seen it. In some ways, it's kind of been nice seeing like the general public become more aware of surveillance, and just people in general, like wanting to use things like the Signal app on their phone to do encrypted texting and calls and stuff like that. That's become much more common. People still don't seem to understand PGP for their emails as much, but I always encourage people to get that on your computer, use PGP when you're emailing so that it can be more secure. And then, if everyone uses this stuff, it protects everyone more, and it doesn't single some people out.
So I know we've just been using that term very, very loosely, but for anyone who's listening that doesn't know, would you mind giving like a high overview of what security culture really is?
Yeah, so my general definition of it is it's just practices that we use to keep information that should be private more private, and to keep each other safer. And so it kind of encapsulates a lot of stuff, everything from kind of what we've mentioned about like maybe using things on your devices to encrypt things, so that information is less open to surveillance. It also could be things like not bragging and gossiping like all over Facebook and stuff like that, and making it very clear who the people are that like someone's having a problem with, to remember that like what we're doing isn't about cool points or something. Like, do the work. You don't need to like brag about everything. It can put people at risk. And then also acknowledging that like, we shouldn't be gossiping and like airing all our dirty laundry all over Facebook to let the government see. But we also need to, at the same time, have private conversations or conversations in our community about real issues that come up, because like one of the biggest threats that, consistently has been a problem in communities are things like abusive men. And that becomes part of security culture too, is addressing, things like that are happening that are maybe pushing people out of spaces, making people not feel comfortable. Maybe people are excusing problematic behavior, and then that can just snowball into all kinds of problematic things happening. So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where like grounding a lot of the work we do in more radical politics, and not being like a single issue about like, if you care about animals, you're allowed to be here, but it's also about how we treat each other. And so is security culture keeping each other safe that can apply to so many different things.
And one of the things that always stuck out to me in every security culture class I've taken a part of or reading is always the don't ask, you really don't want to know.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of what I always tell people. It's like, if you like consider who you're sharing information with, and consider what information you're asking to be shared with you, because if somebody has information, like that puts a lot of responsibility on them. So consider who you're talking to about things.
So what are some other things we, as not just an animal rights community, but as the greater community that we're trying to build, what are some things that we should be working on that you think or see that we're just aren't having the focus that you would like?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. Since we were just talking about security culture, I guess one of the things that I'd love to see just more communities have is kind of more of that sort of knowledge and more kind of legal knowledge about how like the government and the legal system and corporations work, because that's something that we're always up against, and that it unfortunately hurts us when we don't understand it. Like I always encourage people, like every time you see that there's going to be like a know your rights training or a security culture training, like go to it, like to remember that, you know, that's a lot of information that doesn't just like instantly sink in. And that like, if you ever are in a situation where, you know, you're confronted with a cop standing over you, yelling at you, telling you that you have to talk to him, it's a lot different than when you're sitting in like a classroom somewhere learning that you have the right to remain silent. So just having that information as like automatic as possible in you. I just always encourage people to have as much knowledge of that sort of stuff as possible. But then in regard to like more like broader movement stuff, I'd love to see people just doing more reaching across movement lines. Like we aren't going to get nearly as far if we're always all working in isolation as if we, you know, reach out to communities in other cities or communities doing other sorts of work. We're all going to be stronger if we're learning from each other and sharing tactics and sharing lessons learned and sharing friendships, and just having that broader community support is going to be, it helps us both when we are trying to get things done. Like if you, like with the No New Animal Lab campaign, I credit a lot of the success of how that's gone to like the relationships that we had with people across movements, and people wanting to support it in different ways. And then it also is huge when things like government repression happen, if you have that broad network of community support. And doing that stuff in tangible ways, like actually go out to demonstrations that, you know, maybe another community organized, ask what you can do to help, ask what you can do to support, look for where those needs are and like what you can offer to fill them. And doing that without expectation of like what you want in return, but just doing it because it's work that genuinely needs to be done and that you care about.
You know, when you say always go to the classes because you need those refreshers, one thing that I'd like to add in is that, and I'm terrible at this, by the way, is do the role playing, because it really does fucking help. And if you're in a class and they're not doing it, suggest it. But until you're in those situations, you don't realize how much those role playing scenarios really do help you prepare yourself. Yeah.
I very much agree with that. Actually say the words. Like, it's awkward, but say the words. Like, I'd like to remain silent. I do not consent to a search. I want a lawyer. All that stuff that is super important, because cops are allowed to lie to you, and they're allowed to tell you whatever they want to try to get you to talk. And exercising your right to remain silent is sometimes one of the best things you can do, both to protect yourself as well as other people.
And then, like, when you talk about moving across movement lines, this is something that we talk a lot about, but we don't really talk about how someone goes about that. So what are some suggestions for how people go about expanding that and moving across, the different movement lines? Yeah.
Yeah. For me personally, I was actually starting to do more prisoner support work that kind of expanded what I was doing, because I was doing prisoner support work for friends of mine from the animal liberation movement. And then that started to make me interested in what people from other movements had gone through and dealing with that stuff. And so for something like that, then it's like, go to a letter writing event that's maybe hosted by like a local anarchist Black Cross chapter or something. The puppy. And like, learn about, who the other prisoners are, and then see what you can do to support, their support campaigns and things like that. So that's something that can be pretty, like, one of the simple ways is do something like that. Like I've just done like going out to other demonstrations, thinking about if you have skills you can offer. Like I teach Know Your Rights trainings. So I started teaching Know Your Rights trainings for like a lot of the environmental activists in the Northwest and things like that. So I think that a lot of it is just like thinking about what you can offer and then be willing to, step outside of your little bubble and go do work with other people, and being humble about it and recognizing that you might have a lot to learn, depending on how far outside your usual bubble you're going and doing that. And to recognize that that's okay. Like do the work to learn about other movements, what their issues are, what kind of support they need.
And then you talked a little bit about having a knowledge of like the legal process and also like the corporate process. Would you mind going into that a little bit more, like maybe what you see is missing?
You mean like what's missing, like within
our movement, like what kind of knowledge? Yeah, like activist knowledge is missing towards the legal process or how corporations work and things like that.
Yeah, I think something that was a surprise to me, I guess, a bit when I started with the No New Animal Lab campaign. Like with that, we've dealt with being sued several times, as well as there were some arrests with people having criminal charges. And it amazed me how many people who were newer to things thought that the legal system was this neutral space and that, we'd win because, clearly our hearts are in the right place type thing. And then we're shocked to find out that judges don't really like home demos and it doesn't go so well for you in court. Or if you're doing something like a home demo and cops get called, it doesn't matter sometimes how much you tell them that you were standing on a public sidewalk and you're allowed to do that when neighbors are standing there saying that like their children are sleeping inside. So things like that, we're just recognizing that like the legal system clearly has its biases and it's a racist, classist, like really messed up system. And that, so recognizing if, we're dealing with it, that we are not on some kind of level playing field. Yeah, it was amazing having to explain to people why, like, it's not going to be a good idea to call the cops right now because a neighbor is yelling at you type thing. That, and it makes me so upset every time I hear people say things like we shouldn't, test on animals. We should just test on criminals. And I'm like, who do you think decides what a so-called criminal is? And like just so many problematic layers with saying things like that and needing to just talk to people about like what this system even is and the ways that it classifies people based on race and class and other factors. So I think that's a big thing, is just that sort of knowledge of that like political knowledge and looking at the legal system from a more radical framework. And then also recognizing too that a lot of times, even when we feel like everything is stacked against us with the legal system, that there are other people that it's even more stacked against them. And so doing what we can to make sure that anything that we're doing with the legal system doesn't hurt other people more. And then with corporate stuff, I think there just needs to be more learning about how corporations operate, where their vulnerabilities come from, and recognizing too that when we're looking at these like giant monolithic seeming corporations, that ultimately it's people who are running them and making decisions, and learning about who's making the decisions that are the decisions that you care about based on what you're trying to accomplish, and thinking about how to influence those people. Because we see so many protests that are just things like, I'm going to go stand outside the circus and protest it. It's like that can be good for a public education thing, but it's not really a lot of pressure on who decided to book the circus in that city or something. And you can apply that kind of logic to a lot of different sorts of campaigns. It's just like, who is actually making decisions, and is what you're doing right now actually like putting pressure on those people?
Earlier you were discussing like the testing on prisoners instead. It reminded me of a protest that I went to recently at a zoo where someone had a sign that said, "Animals don't belong in cages, prisoners do."
Oh God.
How do we like approach these people who, you know, with their ignorance, but they have good intentions? How do we start that conversation and connect these different movements?
Yeah. I try to do what I can to make it as accessible as possible to them. So when I'm talking to people who are saying the stuff from that, like, supporting animals perspective, you know, like a lot of times, like the first thing I'll say is like, well, you know that the government considers people that save animals from cages to be criminals. So, and they're prisoners. So don't you think that, you know, that puts some holes in your idea of what maybe a criminal or a prisoner is? And then from there, take it a little bigger. Like, and in addition to that maybe now you can question a bit, let's think about, you know, overall what the government does to decide who's going to be a criminal and how they're going to be treated, and try and talk about, you know, the different factors such as like race that very much impact who's in prison, and then from there take it to the whole prison industrial complex and like the reasons it's set up in the way it is. I mean, this might not all be like one conversation with someone, but I just try and like start with meeting them where they're at, because if you just sometimes start with the, you know, like, well, prison shouldn't even exist type thing, you might not get as far. But yeah, it's definitely a problem in the movement that I think needs a lot more conversation around it, is that, you know, for a group of people who are trying to challenge how people think about the way animals are treated, we often don't do very well considering how groups of humans are treated. And that's something that people outside our movement take note of, and why a lot of times we find ourselves feeling isolated. And when we're wondering like why people don't want to come to our protests, maybe we should think about some of those things that make other communities feel like we don't care about them or the work that they do.
Do you have like a go-to essential reading you like to direct people to in those type of situations?
Oh gosh, not off the top of my head, but I do a lot of just article reading. So yeah, so I'm not thinking of anything specific right now, but I encourage people to just start learning about things like the prison industrial complex and stuff like that. But I don't know if you all have things you specifically like to direct people to.
You know, not towards the prison industrial complex, no. That's why I was kind of asking, because I was hoping that there was like an easy, you know, a little read that's just like connects the dots really quickly for people. Because for me, it took a while before that foundation was laid, and you know, you kind of see that whole path.
Yeah, I think one of the best things people can do is take the time to write to a prisoner. If you like aren't sure what you think about the whole prison system, as soon as you get to know someone who's in it, you'll start to see it a lot differently, because you'll see how it's actually impacting someone and all the stuff that they have to deal with. And yeah, I think that that's a place that can personalize it for people and lead them to other learning. Is just write to someone in prison.
Well, I can't believe it's already been an hour. What are some ways that people can get in touch with the Cleveland 4, some of the other projects you're involved with?
Yeah. So as I said, they have a website, which is cleveland4solidarity.org, or you can just Google Cleveland 4. And on there, you can see their addresses for writing them letters. You can see how to send them books. There's links to donate through PayPal, or you can donate through, they have an online fundraising platform, write them letters. And And they're also on Facebook at Cleveland 4 Solidarity and on Twitter at Free Cleveland 4. So just check out all that. You can find out a lot more information about their case through just looking up old Cleveland 4 news articles. And it really is, the more you learn about it, the more appalling it becomes, and the more you'll see why we need to show support for them and others, and make sure that they're not forgotten and that they know that people are supporting them in the face of the nightmare that they've been through.
Well, we end every episode saying fuck, shit, damn. Would you mind saying it for us this week?
Fuck, shit, damn.
This week you heard
Same Dream China by Gold Panda.
Right now you're listening to
Summer Water by Coin.
Want to give a big thank you to Kless876, who left this review for us at iTunes, titled Veganarchy for Your Ears. Great hosts and interesting guests. Check them out. Thank you, Kless. We also got another one from Lar, 1019 Lar, titled Amazing Podcast. One of the best vegan podcasts ever. I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of you, Lar.
Thank you.
So be like these two amazing people. Go rate and review the show on your favorite podcast aggregator. It really helps us out. It just makes it easier for people to find the show. So go take a minute of your time in doing that, and it helps out everyone. You can even troll us in there as long as you give us, 5 stars. It doesn't matter.
You don't also have to be a person. You can be a robot.
Or cyborg, a mix.
I mean, I'm sure that by saying robot, there's violation of some sort of iTunes thing with bots.
Probably.
We're kidding. Speaking of being a person, you should be our friend on social media, where you don't have to be a person.
You don't have to be a person. So many bots out there.
Just go to whichsidepodcast.com, click on the social tab, and be our friend. We post things almost every day that we don't talk about on the show.
We don't even make you confirm that you're not a person or not a robot.
We don't.
Bottom way.
Fuck shit, damn.
Fuck shit, damn.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Theme music by Commandantes. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.